Good evening and thank you and welcome to the meeting today. So I'm just going to start with the formalities. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on the proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you've left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. So we're going to begin the meeting with appointment of substitutes.
Yes, Chair, we have Councillor Ali for Councillor Sadiq and no apologies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then we're going to move on to declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Agenda item 9, the report linked to that talks about taxi licences and I hold licence in the city.
Okay, thank you. Public participation. Don't look like we have anyone, but
there is none, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Which brings us on to the minutes of the meeting on the 23rd of July. Does anybody have any comments or amendments on the minutes? I can go through page by page, but I'm more than happy if somebody just wants to say if there's anything they would like corrected or anything that isn't accurate. I'm taking silence as assent, so thank you. I think, Margaret, you did the minutes. Thank you. No questions on that. It's a long agenda, so we will rattle on through. So item 5 on the agenda is the update on the Environmental Sustainability Strategy Action Plan. It's a nice, succinct title there. And I think we're going to Dave to talk about that.
Thank you, Chair. I won't attempt to say that again. So, members, this evening you have a report for noting on progress on delivery of the plan, the action plan. You'll be aware this is a twice-yearly update that comes to this committee. With you, we have a covering report and 3 appendices. So, Appendix 1 is the detailed summary of project status across all of the action plan actions. We also have at Appendix 2, we've put the electrical vehicle delivery plan, which is the delivery plan for our EV charging strategy, which this committee previously approved. And also Appendix 3 is the Biodiversity First Considerations Action Plan, also approved by the committee, which is our first steps towards working on our biodiversity duty. And you'll be aware we have a new biodiversity officer who started a few months ago with us. Section 4 is just a reminder of the Sustainability Enabling Reserve and the balance that's there. There's a report on the agenda immediately following this one, which is asking for a small allocation from that reserve. So we'll come to that. Ruth will present that shortly. So I'm just going to pick out a few highlights without going on length. 23 actions have been completed now on the action plan, the Sustainability Action Plan. There are 16 still in progress. Just wanted to bring to your attention that alongside delivering the specific actions approved in the plan, we've responded successfully to a number of grant funding opportunities. These tend to arise sometimes at very short notice. And you'll be aware of Swimming Pool Support Fund, the work we're doing around electric cremators, EV charge points, a heat network study, and a couple of others there. The team have been successful in achieving almost £2 million of external funding in the last couple of years. So really significant, and it's not always possible to plan these opportunities in with a workload. There are, of course, great benefit to the city, and they've been prioritised at the time for workload, but inevitably there's an impact on delivery of the rest of the action plan. You'll be aware we're a small team of 3 within the sustainability team, and Ruth, who's here, does an enormous amount of work on these bids when they arise. Moving on to the action plan, we've begun procurement on the electric cremators, project being overseen by Policy and Resources Committee. Solar panels at Purdeswell Leisure Centre, grant funding for that. Again, that's progressing well, as is reducing electricity usage from the lighting at St Martin's Gate car park, so another project which is nearly complete. You remember we secured funding to commission a study into the feasibility and costs of electrifying the depot, which will enable it to receive and charge electric fleet for the operational fleet. So that's a feasibility study that's underway. We've actually had the final draft report. Officers need to go through that, and we'll bring that to committee in due course. We've now approved a proposal for sustainability training for staff, so a mixed approach to sustainability training, something that's proportionate and targeted rather than a one-size-fits-all training for all staff. And we'll also be offering training to members in due course. On our outsourced emissions, the swimming pool and leisure centres are included within the council's figures and within our carbon footprint. I mentioned the work that's going on for solar PV at Purd as well. We're also working very closely with the Community Trust to identify options for decarbonation of the 6 community centres owned by the council and operated by WCT. There's a second round, this is at 7.1, of the Warms Home programme, the government's Warms Home programme, and we're currently working with the County Council and other partners on potential to deliver that on a county-wide basis. For the next phase of that, for delivery from April 2025. And there's a note at 7.2 to say that 88 city residents have taken up the Solar Together offer, a crowd procurement solar scheme was run across the county. Emissions from transport 7.3, members I'm sure are all aware of the Beryl Bike scheme that's now running successfully. At the start of October, over 62,000 kilometres have been cycled on Beryl bikes. That's the saving of carbon over road transport of 2 tonnes of carbon dioxide. That's a project overseen by Health and Wellbeing Committee, and there'll be a more detailed report in the new year to Health and Wellbeing Committee. Our EV charge points are now live, not only at King Street, also Tallow Hill. Tallow Hill went live in August, so we've now got Tallow Hill, King Street and St Martin's Gate. And we've got an officer group overseeing that, looking at market conditions. That's a scheme that's breaking even, as was envisaged and mandated by committee. The Heat Networks at 7.12, the Heat Networks delivery unit funded grant into the potential for a heat network for the city is progressing quite well. There's a lot more work to do on that, looking at the feasibility of such a scheme. So we will make a more detailed report to committee when that's ready. At 9, just a reminder on sustainability, biodiversity. The biodiversity officer has been here since May and is working hard on a biodiversity strategy and also delivering the action plan for our first considerations on biodiversity, which was required of the council. That's in Appendix 3. And also supporting the local nature recovery strategy, which is a responsibility of the County Council, but we are a statutory partner in that. There are a number of bids and improvement works around our green spaces under the new Green Spaces Manager. And just to note for members, Ofton Lane is one of the areas being included specifically, so that will be considered in the biodiversity strategy and action plan. And then we'll seek further funding for that site depending on what the proposals are. You will be aware we brought a detailed report on flood risk management to the last committee. I'm pleased to say that in addition to the Diglis residents, a flood group has been formed by the Waterworks Road residents, which met last week, and I was pleased to be able to attend that. So that's enabling us to support residents and then to support themselves as well. So I think I'll leave it there, Chair. There's a lot of detail in the appendices. Happy to take questions.
Thank you very much. I'll go to the floor for questions in a moment. But I just would like to echo something we've said, I think, before in this committee, but I think it bears saying again, and that's thank you to yourself and Ruth and your other member of the team for all the work that you've put in. You've put a lot of work in at very short notice and brought in, Karen and I have said quite a few times that we could add up how much you've brought in. You've probably paid for yourself several times over with spare money. So I think it's really worth saying thank you to the team. Team seems a bit of an excessive term for the three of you, but thank you for the team for all the work that you've done for the council. I'm then going to go to Councillor Cross first.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much for this report. Really encouraging to see the work being done and the progress with, for example, the barrel bike scheme. How soon are we likely to have more bays in Warndon villages, please? Because we've got one bay for approximately 10,000 residents. And there's another question about our ponds and how they're managed. Interested to hear where are we at, for example, with the Azolla treatment or the Azolla rectification at Lippard Ponds, Special Area Conservation, and how the management of our ponds and waterways that are waterways in case of flooding, so culverts, etc., how that all ties in. So it's basically a mix between sections 9 and 10, but our blue spaces for biodiversity, but also for coping, resilience. Thank you very much.
Okay, Jeff, I'll pick up. I think there's three elements to that. Ruth will answer on the bays because she's very actively engaged on the barrel bike bays. Regarding the ponds and Lippard ponds, there'll be some more detailed work on that within the biodiversity strategy, which will look at biodiversity across the whole of the city. I think Lippard ponds had settled down in some degree in terms of their management, but you've quite rightly flagged up there is a concern around an invasive species there. An invasive species, of which Azolla is one of them, will feature in our biodiversity strategy. And then there is some work ongoing around looking at various culverts and watercourses around your area of the city and others. There's probably quite a bit of detail there that I think we need to come back to you outside of the meeting, if that's okay. So, hand over to Ruth, Chair.
Thank you. So with regard to barrel bike bays in Warndon villages, absolutely aware that there's a gap in the network there, particularly with the bay having to be suspended. You may be aware we have been in discussion with Wood Green Church about a bay on their land, and actually sort of latest news is just from today to say that they have taken it by their trustees and they are happy with the proposal. So yes, the licence should be signed very shortly. The bay may not go in immediately because we need a few bays together ready to go purely for Beryl's operational reasons in terms of getting a contractor out to paint the bays. So it might be a few weeks until the bay is marked. But yes, we will be having a bay at Wood Green according to the information I have today.
Thank you. We're going to go to Richard Udall next.
Thank you, Chair. Two very separate, different kind of questions. First of all, I'm a bit curious. Who else sees this document other than us as councillors? And does it go to government? Does it go to any other body? And can we actually use this document in any way to actually generate more revenue, gain grants and support for income elsewhere to do more projects? Or can we use it in some other way publicly to actually gain some kind of attitude change or policy change in other areas? That's my first question. Do you want me to rest before I come to my more detailed one?
I want to answer that one first and then go back to the other one. It probably makes it easier for people.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. This is a report for members, so for this committee, it doesn't ordinarily go anywhere else specifically. I'm aware the press are here tonight and often pick up quite a few elements from this report. In terms of can we use it to generate more revenue, certainly when bidding for funding opportunities, having a strategy and an action plan that's in place, a number of projects ready to go and scoped out is immensely helpful in being able to bid for further funding. So it does support that to quite a good degree.
Okay, thank you. I think that's useful. I do wonder whether we should send it to our local Member of Parliament so he's aware of its contents and can support us in some of our endeavours. A more detailed question, on paragraph, I'm assuming the best place to raise it is in paragraph 9. I'm increasingly concerned about the water quality of some of our rivers, streams and waterways in the city. I'm aware that some prosecutions have taken place recently after pollution in Lawn Brook, which actually took a very frustrating 7 years to get to court, but finally conviction was secured after the killing of thousands of fish in the brook. There is legitimate concern out there that the Lawn Brook is still polluted, is still a polluted watercourse. Most of its route in the city is within our land, so I am concerned about how we can actually monitor the quality of water in the Lawn Brook, which flows into the River Team, which in turn flows into the River Severn. So it goes further downstream, and it's a very important waterway which goes through the centre of St John's. I'm conscious that the Lawn Brook, Friends of Lawn Brook Nature Reserve have done some of their own testing, and some of the figures have been quite horrific, what they've seen. So it's a problem of water runoff going into the brook, which is polluting the brook, damaging wildlife and damaging watercourses further downstream. I do wonder whether we can actually pick up on water quality issues. And I'm sure Lawn Brook isn't unique. I'm sure that's happening on watercourses throughout the city. But I do wonder if we can, as a local authority, pick up on some water quality activity to actually demonstrate to others that we need to be more specific in our targeting of activity, which is polluting the brooks and watercourses in the city, and do something about the water quality.
Thank you. And I recall there was a more general question regarding water quality in the Severn, I think we discussed at the previous committee. The Environment Agency, the responsible enforcing authority, and I'm sure it was the Environment Agency that took that prosecution, the successful prosecution. I think if there is a specific concern and a localised concern, then more than happy for officers to pick that up with the Environment Agency. We are not resourced to monitor water quality. Actually, we wouldn't have officers who were trained and able to do that, so we would have to outsource that to a specialist if we were going to monitor water quality. I think perhaps if I could suggest that the favoured approach would be for us to have a discussion about that specific area, and we can report that into the Environment Agency and try and pick it up in that way.
Thank you, Chair. I would agree with that, but I do think it's something which is of significant local concern. And maybe we can have a report back to a future committee about water pollution and water quality and waterways which run throughout our land, like the Lawn Brook. So we can look at what we can do and who we can commission and who we can't commission to actually control the situation. So those discussions which could be had with the Environment Agency may be able to be fed back to members so we can actually monitor the situation a bit more as an Environment Committee.
One suggestion that's just been made to me is that one option we might have is to invite the Environment Agency to come to a future meeting in which we could ask them these sorts of questions directly.
Do you know, I hadn't thought of that. Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. That's a very good idea. Can we invite the Environment Agency to go to the Environment Committee? I was going to say licensing committee then, to give us a presentation on what they are doing to actually keep our watercourses safe and pure in Worcester.
Yeah, certainly we can start those discussions and try and find the most appropriate person. And I'm more than happy to do a member briefing on the law around water quality enforcement and responsibilities, which I think might be helpful in just outlining that, and perhaps a briefing note would be better use of members' time than me bringing that in a committee report.
We're going to go round in more or less the order that people came up with, but I think Councillor Lewing had a particular point potentially linked to this, so we're going to go to you first. And then I've got down Councillor Scott, Councillor Rudge and Councillor Cooper.
I've actually got a quite broad thing to raise, I'm sorry. Is that okay? Well, it's because this is a 6-monthly report. I think what I'd like to say is that when you look at all the aspects of work that we're doing, how interlinked they are with our aim of achieving carbon zero by 2030. And a key one for me is the green skills. We do not have enough people, the workforce in the UK at the moment, to address this gap in the demand for a net zero economy. So this is absolutely brilliant that we're doing this. And that links to our badly insulated homes, our badly insulated rented homes, which are linked to the cost of living crisis, moving away from gas boilers and fossil fuels, which are dependency, which are affected by international wars and, you know, economically damaging volatility that's in the market. And it's about all sorts of aspects, of course, for travel as well. But one thing I want to say is, you know, the cost of not reaching net zero. We've seen what's happened in Spain recently, and we did have, and thank you, David, for the meeting with the Waterworks Road residents. They were hugely appreciative of the focus on them. We have to realise what the negative impact of this is, and actually undermining the investment in net zero is actually going to make households poorer, colder, and our global food system break down. Will also have extreme weather, and this is why we have to do this. So I just want to thank the three officers who work on all this for us. I know that they work beyond the hours that they're contracted to. Fantastic work. So I've just got a couple of questions, and really it's that I would really like it, please, if the City Council could ask Enterprise to promote the car clubs a little bit more. I know in the Arboretum I have quite a lot of resident turnover, and I know there are residents who've probably moved into roads where there is low car ownership, and actually they would appreciate knowing about the car club in our ward. And also I don't know if it's in this bit of the report, I'm sorry, it's a very big report, it's very good, about bikeability training for staff. I would like it, please, if you could ask members whether they would like bikeability training. I have talked to some members who do not have the confidence to cycle, and actually I think even, you know, I cycle a lot, but I'm not the most confident cyclist, so I think that could be quite good as well, particularly with what you're doing with the barrel bike schemes for staff. And then just the other thing is the emissions from our buildings. Is that on this one? Yeah, it is, isn't it? I see that we've done the feasibility studies on certain buildings, but I really want us to look at every building when we have the opportunity to do something about it, for us to take that opportunity. And I have been disappointed recently that there has been no improvement in the energy. Well, I don't know if there has, whether you've got more installation in the building, but there are no solar panels proposed for the pump house, for example. And there could be a very good reason why there aren't. There really could. But actually, what are we here for? And so any building that we have, I think we should be really focused on what we can do, and actually, you know, report it back to us as well if you can't do it and why. Thank you.
Did anybody want to make any comments on that?
Be helpful to members just to pick up on a couple of those points. So there's fortunate to be at the Green Centre yesterday in Dines Green, where the building block 2 is progressing really, really well. That is due to open in the spring of next year. An A-rated for energy efficiency building that will deliver construction skills and particularly focus on skills in green construction around air source heat pumps and those sort of solar and those sorts of technologies. So that's part of the town investment plan project. So that's a really positive thing that the council's doing. Bikeability training, yes, that falls under the active travel action plan. The Health and Wellbeing Committee oversees, and training for members is part of our plans for that, I'm pleased to say. I think I'll just leave it at those. Your points well made around our buildings. We do look at all our buildings. There's a large amount of work to do, and obviously business cases will be worked at where possible.
Thank you. So moving on, because we have quite a number of members wanting to talk on this item, we're going to go to Councillor Scott next.
Thank you. Yes, I thought it an excellent report, and somebody quite new to this committee and this council, a really good summary of all we're doing on the environment. So excellent. Just on the carbon, I may have missed it elsewhere in the report, but that last point made by Councillor Lewin about carbon reduction from our estate, do we set an overall carbon reduction target from the work of the local authority? That's the first question. The second one is a specific one of great relevance to Cathedral Ward, and that's the dig list, the last thing you mentioned, David, the Diglis Flood Action Group. What prospects do we see of them achieving their long asked for flood barriers to prevent the inundation of their homes? I know they've been talking and expecting to work from the Environment Agency. Is there any progress that you can report on? And I must make a comment on bikeability, and I think we should set all councillors a target of going round the pump track at least twice. You can use hands if they like. Thank you.
I think with regard to Diglis, I can only make a general comment really that the Environment Agency are engaged on that. A scheme of a flood wall is incredibly complex in terms of the topography, the geology underneath the ground, construction, funding, business cases, cost multipliers, return on investment. So a very complex piece of work. We're doing what we can to support the residents there. It is something for the Environment Agency, and I can't really give you any more detail on that. Yep. So the council is committed to being zero carbon for 2030. I think in our performance report we don't have a carbon figure in at the moment. We're just waiting to validate this year's figure. There's been a change in the way that's been calculated. So we haven't set a specific year-on-year target. As you can see from the work that we're doing, we're picking off various projects and aiming those that are deliverable and those that are at sort of big carbon reduction. So you know, our electric cremators will make a big impact on the council.
Thank you. We're going to move to Councillor Rudge.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points. The first is I welcome the Beryl bikes being located at Wood Green Church. That's fantastic. Can I just check, please, that the old bay has been removed or will be removed so that there's no confusion?
Yes, so essentially when the contractors come back to paint new bays, my understanding is they will remove the old bay. So, yeah.
Lovely, thank you. The second point is about Ofton Lane, which I do welcome more than anything in this report, having seen it in such a state of disrepair. You'll be pleased to know that the Worcestershire Environment Group have already been there twice as a group of volunteers and are going back again tomorrow and the week after. So that'll be 4 long days. I did last week with them. It is a long day. And they've made a huge difference because it is now accessible. It's a beautiful site and it should be a fantastic site. What I wouldn't mind some clarity on is when you say looking for future funding, are we talking for, is that funding from within the council, or is it possible for us to look for funding outside? Is that something we can do as individuals through the Duckworth Trust grant scheme, for example, or through other schemes similar to that?
Okay, so I think the first thing for us to establish, part of the work that will come out of the biodiversity strategy is what work it is most appropriate to do at Ofton Lane. It is a man-made structure, and over time, all ponds and lakes, they change, they fill up, they move. So we need to take a decision on what's the best approach for us there. Absolutely, external funding, I think it may well end up being quite a costly piece of work if we're doing major work there. So we will be looking outside of the council for funding. Obviously, if it's more minor work, some of that can be done within existing budgets and around maintenance. I hope that's helpful.
It is. May I just make one point? The original purpose of the ponds, as I understand from reading the paperwork, is that they're filtration ponds. So they're meant to clean the water. The reeds are meant to do that, and then the water flows into Barbourne Brook. So it does have a functional element as well as a sort of biodiversity and an element for relaxation and leisure, that's the one that's got lost, I think, with the silt trap not being put in, and the place gradually the silt builds up and it gets swamped very, very quickly, very easily. So that's my concern with that one. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I really welcome this report. Councillor Leung answered most of my questions, so I didn't need to do that. I was wondering, in terms of tree planting and street trees in particular, members will notice that if you walk down a tree-lined street, how much cooler it is in the summer than the tarmac and the heat that comes off that. I was wondering if we could somehow put pressure on the county council to allow us to have more street trees. For example, in Philadelphia, they have a street tree project where residents can request trees. I'd like to see if there was some way that we could be pushing county as someone who owns the pavements to be able to be a bit more flexible with that in terms of urban heating and, of course, all the other benefits that tree planting provides. Thank you.
I don't know whether any officer have got an idea of what we as the City Council can do, but I mean, we as councillors can clearly lobby county councillors and make sure that where we've got representatives, I think we've got at least 2 county councillors in the room today, that they are speaking on our behalf as well.
Just going to remind members that we're developing a tree strategy alongside our biodiversity strategy, which will cover the whole of the city, and I'm sure that will be an element of it. As the Chair's pointed out, there are certain challenges for the City Council in trees on other people's land.
Just to make members aware, the County Council are also currently consulting on their streetscape design guide. Members may want to have a look at that with relation to street trees. Thank you.
Do we know when the closing date for that consultation is? Sorry, putting you on the spot.
Monday the 27th of January.
So yeah, we'll put that in, Councillor Ewing suggested, I think it'd be useful to put that in member briefing so that people have got that cited on something to respond to.
Yeah, absolutely. It only opened yesterday, so it's a new consultation. Thanks.
So a very timely point, Councillor Cooper, that make sure we can raise that and move that going forward. Councillor Smith, and then I'll come back to Councillor Udall.
Thank you, Chair. What work has been made with the new owners of Chapter Meadows to ensure their future proposals will meet our agenda?
Thank you, Councillor. So I've met with the new owners of Chapter Meadows, with our biodiversity officer. I'm pleased really to report that their intentions are to maintain biodiversity within Chapter Meadows. Nothing particularly intensive. I think their initial focus will be around fences and managing the grazing. I think their aspirations are also to look at public access. So as well as being a nature resource, it will also remain and be an enhanced resource for people to be able to access that, but in a managed way. So they have got some plans they're working up on that. I think it would be probably appropriate for me to let them develop those a little bit more before I share anything in the public. But certainly their intentions do align with the City Council's aspirations for that site.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Udall.
Briefly follow up from the question about street trees. I'm the county council who's probably spent more than any other on street trees. All my discretionary fund has been spent on them for the last 4 years in a row, and we've had literally hundreds of new trees planted in St John's, Woodstock Road, Windsor Avenue, Lawn Road, Comer Road, even Tudor Way, where I was told they would not survive, but they did. There are rules surrounding street trees, which basically means about how wide the road, the footpath is, and whether there will be sufficient space for them to grow and for a pushchair to go by. But county councils have it within their power, and I've certainly used it to develop more street trees and plant them wherever possible, and I will hopefully continue to be able to do that in the years ahead, because I do love our street trees in St John's. They are fantastic.
Thank you. So I think we are being asked, if nobody else wanting to speak on this, I think I've picked up everyone. We are being asked to note this strategy and at the action plan update. I think we've had a robust discussion, so we have to, is everybody happy to note that and to move on? Okay, thank you. And our next item is industrial decarbonisation study, and we're going to go to Ruth for this one.
Thank you, Chair. This report is asking for an allocation of funding from the Environmental Sustainability Enabling Reserve. We had the opportunity to apply to the Midlands Net Zero Hub for a competition around industrial decarbonisation. The purpose of this funding is to enable local authorities to look at industrial areas and how businesses, particularly those who are high intensity carbon emitters, will be able to look at industrial decarbonisation. We only had a fairly short turnaround to be able to put in a bid, but it did identify for us that actually this was both a knowledge and an opportunity gap for us in terms of our existing strategy and action plan. The work that has occurred sort of to date with businesses, including that's been funded sort of from ERDF funding in the past, European funding, and then the Shared Prosperity funding, and has been led by County. It's primarily looked at small to medium enterprises and how those businesses will individually decarbonise, and hasn't looked at sort of joined up across estates or zones. We did apply for a study of £20,000 with £7,000 match funding and £13,000 ask from the competition. We've actually been offered £30,000 with our match requests still staying at £7,000. So that was really good news. Essentially, that means we have more funding available to us to do a larger study and to achieve the aims that we're looking to from this. So the details are within the report. We've included sort of what the expected outcomes are in terms of what the Net Zero Hub are looking for, and then what our outputs and aims are to look at place-based decarbonisation plans for the industrial areas. We identified actually that the whole of the city should be considered an industrial zone because of the spread of businesses. We don't have one particular industrial estate that has a kind of big cluster of manufacturing businesses. The manufacturing businesses, the sort of high carbon emitters that we've identified, are spread across the city. So we identified the city as the zone for which this study will look at. And it's to look at generating a pipeline of projects, again, that we could, or businesses can look together at other sources of funding for. So I think that's probably all I need. Oh, so the funding is requested from the Enabling Reserve. As the previous report stated, the Enabling Reserve budget stands at the moment at 74,000, and we need £7,000 to match fund this study. So that will take us to a total of 67 remaining in that budget. I think I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another example of the team bringing in more than we pay them by quite significant sums. Councillor Scott.
I was wondering what industrial decarbonisation was in detail, and it struck me that the country's industrially decarbonised by exporting all its manufacturing capacity to China, and I hope we're not thinking about shutting places down. But seriously, could you give us perhaps a more concrete example of what might happen? You don't have to name a firm, but give an example of a particular company which could benefit from support and what might happen. Does this project involve direct funding for a business or grant aid, or is it an enabling ideas discussion, really? A bit more detail, please.
Thank you. So the industrial decarbonisation, the types of projects that might be looked at might be, for example, solar PV, which would be quite a basic one, but actually to encourage peer-to-peer energy trading. So it's quite a new opportunity for businesses to be able to have essentially a microgrid. So you might have one business which is a warehouse, big roof space, very little energy usage, you know, a bit of lighting perhaps, no real use for putting solar PV on their extensive roof space. But I'm hoping, and we haven't done the work yet, but they might be next door to a much smaller business without the roof space that actually has got some really high-powered equipment in there, so can use the electricity generated on their neighbouring business roof. Other ones might be around industrial gases. So there's a lot of carbon around industrial gas processing, and we have a couple of businesses in the city who are doing that. You'll be aware we also have steel casting. yeah, there's also a cement mixer, which I was unaware of until I did this research. The study will not fund individual projects. It is a consultant's study, essentially, to look at what opportunities exist and where we can support the businesses to increase their knowledge about the opportunities and have that kind of onward pipeline of projects. Thank you.
I think that was a really useful update and makes us realise how much value we get out of £7,000. We're going to go to Councillor Lewin next.
Yeah, exactly that. It's, I mean, this is why we have the enabling reserve, isn't it? It's having a reserve that we can tap into quickly without coming to committee for approval, to be able to react to these opportunities. And, you know, 7,000 to get 30. And then actually, when you think about what you've just said, Ruth, you know, that could be much more money once these projects are done. And I suppose what I'm saying is that we've got £67,000 left. Even if this council has got very little money, this is an absolute priority for us to have an enabling reserve. Because without this, none of these projects would happen that have happened so far. So, you know, as soon as this starts getting nearer zero, I think we'll be going back and saying we want it topped up, please. So there we go. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on this item? Not seeing any hands going up, in which case you are asked, there's two parts. First, is everybody happy? Are you happy to approve £7,000? If you just like show of hands if you're happy. I think that's unanimous. And are you also equally happy to delegate, this is where I have to put my glasses on and see who we're delegating to, corporate policy and strategy? I'm assuming then that's David. You always have to work out whose name's on the thing. So are we happy to delegate to David Sutton in consultation to accept this and work out the detail? Show of hands. I think that's unanimous. So I think that's passed. And thanks again to officers for which moves us on to item 7, where we're going to be looking at the quarterly performance report for the core services that the council does. And Sandra's going to come and take that one. So,
thank you, Chair. I'll quickly go through the scorecard. I think the projects are looking quite healthy, with quite a lot of greens there, but I do want to draw attention to the waste and recycling collection review. I think that was quite a successful project during the transition to all the city having recycling collected one week and then the following week the residual waste. And I think we had very minimal disruption, and I think that is down to the testament of the waste crews who really pulled at all stops to make sure that worked quite well. So I think that was a really good project that I do want to draw the committee's attention to. Now we've completed that, the next stage, as discussed at the last Environment Committee, we now want to start looking at our recycling figures and our contamination figures, because they are still showing quite unhealthy with red. So this is something that we discussed at last committee, and we're going to start looking at the tactics and strategies in how we can try and increase our recycling rate and reduce that contamination. So that's going to be the next focus for the waste and recycling team moving forward the next few months and into the new year, and hopefully we'll start to see some results once we put some concerted effort into the areas. I'm pleased to see that we are also, although not green, we are moving in the right direction with the litter and dog waste bins. So I think that is going to be hopefully, now we've procured the new vehicles, we've got the new crew in place, we hope to see that that will be a healthy PI in future committees. I'm going to leave that there unless I've got any questions, because I know we normally have quite a lot of questions and I'm conscious of time.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure there will be questions, although I do like the fact that there's a lot of detail in this report, so actually hopefully that precludes the need for some of the questions. And I do think it is testament to the team for how smooth the transition was for the bins. It has been talked about for a very long time, predating probably me joining the council. It's nice to see that it's all happened and happened so smoothly. I think whenever these things happen, with the councillors, you put your tin hat waiting for complaints, and it was nice that we didn't really, I think I got one, which got resolved very quickly. So I'm going to open up to councillors. We're going to start with Councillor Cooper and then Councillor Cross.
Thank you very much, Chair. I had a resident who, not of my ward, of another ward, who's recently moved here from Bristol. And she said when she lived in Bristol, she was very mindful of her contamination. And she would always, rinse out her baked bean tins and, put them in. And she said since moving to Worcester, she's just become a lot lazier because there aren't letters that come through the door, there aren't fines. And she's just become really lax about it. And that concerns me. I'm not saying we should fine on the first incident, of course I'm not. But I do feel like a lot more does need to be done about contamination. So I really would welcome this future work that's happening. Thank you.
I don't think there's probably a need for officers to come back on that, so we'll go straight to Councillor Cross.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for this report. Quick question. We spoke in, I think it was July, at full council, with suggestions about how we can improve the handling of the reporting, how we can streamline possibly the reporting of missed public street bin, and I was under the impression that we'd be working those suggestions through in order to be ready for, well, now really. I know there's an awful lot of things ongoing, but I would welcome those being worked through soon. And so, question about how soon that could be, please. And there was just also a question, so that was related to page 46. Page 51, a couple of graphs at the bottom with about the carbon emissions. Would it be possible to, the baseline, or so the y-axis isn't at 0. I know, appreciate there's quite an offset, but it appears that the graph is flatlining. But it, in order for us to achieve 2030 net zero, how steep does that graph actually need to be? So I'm just wondering, could that be tweaked, and how can we better visualise where we need to be with our target? Thank you very much.
Chair, I'll take the first one, if that's okay. Yes, Councillor, big apologies. We are currently working through some of the proposals from a QR code and the numbering of the bins, but it is a big piece of work, but it hasn't gone off our radar, and we are starting to look at that as the other target as well.
Chair, in respect to the second one, I can pick that up with David separately to look at how we can present that better. There was a piece of work that we committed to meeting with certain members of this committee around presentation of performance reports, in particular graphs and PIs. But with so much going on, that's gone to the wayside a little bit. So I can resurrect that as well following this evening. But I'll take that offline with David, and we can try and work something up.
I think that would be really useful. I think this is a really useful performance report, but I don't think we've probably got it quite right yet. And there was something that happened this week where I was thinking, oh, I assume that's on the performance indicators. It was about removal of grey graffiti because it was something that used to be there. And I went and looked and went, oh, it seems to have dropped. That's equally my responsibility as a member for not actually making sure we do that. But I think it's really positive, but there's more work that we can do. We're going to go to Councillor Cooper next.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two things, please, on very different topics. For cemeteries, I wonder if it's worth looking at Google reviews, because people often will put their thoughts, and that's quite a public way of doing it. So I wonder if it's worth thinking about that and helping form a narrative for this performance indicator. And on a very different subject of satisfaction with parks and play areas, In the last few weeks, I've noticed a bit of a decline in standards in Gulliver Park. I spend nearly every day in Gulliver Park. There's been lots of overflowing in dog bins, which I've never noticed in all the years I've lived there, but the last few weeks that's been quite bad. Leaves in the park on, so I've been reporting them myself. Today I was in the park and a 10-year-old slipped over on her bike because of all the leaves that were there, and she couldn't even see the path because the leaves are so thick. So I just like maybe a little bit more attention to be paid in Gulliver Park. It makes me think that something's gone a bit awry, that the standards are normally very high, but they just seem to have slipped in the last few weeks. Thank you.
With regards to the satisfaction, obviously it's the annual satisfaction survey, so we can link in with David's team of how we can perhaps look at broadening that and getting that richer picture of information. With regards to Gallivelt, we have had one of the members of staff that has been dedicated to that resource has just recently left the council, so we're now putting some resource in a team effort, so you should hopefully see some difference in the next week or so, because that is happening as we speak.
I just wanted to add that one of the things in terms of the dashboard is that Karen and I have had discussions with officers about is the annual satisfaction survey the best way. Clearly these are things that we need to measure, but it's probably a very crude measure and not the most accurate one. Google reviews isn't something we've discussed, but it seems like a sensible thing to consider, because the satisfaction survey probably doesn't give us a fair understanding of satisfaction, but it's what we have at the moment, and I think with all of our dashboard we need to nuance it and develop as we go along, rather than just throw the baby out with the bathwater. David, you look like you wanted to come in there, or no, that's fine. Councillor Cooper wants to come back, and I think Councillor Lewin may have had her hand up as well.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, with Google reviews, people that are using the cemetery might not necessarily be local residents that would participate in our survey. They might be coming from further afield, you know, to say goodbye to loved ones. So I think that's why it's quite good to see a sort of better, broader picture than just relying on our resident survey, because they're not always residents that are using that facility. Thank you.
Councillor Lewin.
Yeah, that's really, really funny that Hannah said that, because I was just about to say that the satisfaction for parks is actually people not necessarily in our city for the same reason. But that's why, I think that's a good idea too. But that's also why I am so pleased. I've got the biggest smile that you are sorting out the cast iron bins in the parks. You know, this has been a bugbear of ours for years. They look shockingly bad, and it was even picked up by the green flag inspectors that they let the park down. And so I think it's something that people will really appreciate. It's such a well-loved park, and actually thank you for getting more resource there. It's so important.
Do we have any other comments or questions on this, Councillor Udall?
It's purely on the satisfaction on parks, and the criticism which I get on a regular basis about the jewel in the crown of our parks, which obviously it's Cripplegate, is the problem of the broken play equipment, which we've still got. And I know there are problems ongoing to try and resolve that. But how closer are we to actually achieving something in the very near future which will deliver the equipment which we've been talking about for some time, which will relieve some of the frustrations which I get quite regularly from users of the park, especially users with young children?
Chair, obviously, provision of play equipment is a matter for PED committee and not this committee, but obviously, you know, oversight of parks is. I'll take that one back to base and see where we are with that one, and we can report back to Councillor Udall on what the plans are for sort of existing redundant equipment in the park. But obviously, more strategically, that park is being considered for potential priority play projects, and again, that will be reported back to PED committee in due course. But I'll report back to Councillor Udall on that particular point.
Thank you for that. And while we're talking about jewels in the crowns, we don't want some of our other parks to feel unloved, things like King George V Playing Field and Fort Royal. There are parks beyond Cripplegate and Gulliver that are equally used and valued within our communities. Councillor Lewin.
Sorry, I've got one more thing I wanted to say actually. We've got on fly tipping a 96% percentage for going for 2 working days to remove fly tipping. I think that's astoundingly good. I wish that every landowner, not naming anybody, in the city had a percentage near that, and maybe they could aspire to it and come to us for tips. Thank you.
We have offered to some providers who would most benefit from support from fly tipping that they could actually just commission us to do it for them, and then it might actually happen. And that is something that I know the leader and deputy leader of the council are actively trying to pursue. Okay. With that in mind, and it's interesting naming no names, and we all know who we're talking about. Is everybody happy to approve the quarter 2 performance report? Okay, in that case, we will move on, and our next item is around the finances and the forward planning, and we're going to go to Kathy Davies.
Thank you, Chair. So this is now our established approach to regarding the early stages of budget setting. And committee is receiving a report that follows a similar structure and methodology to previous years, and hopefully councillors are familiar with this. The rationale is not to have a detailed debate at this stage, but simply to present you with the relevant information for this committee, so that you can see the areas that may change. And we will come back in January, and members may then have a view about what changes they expect to make. With that in mind, we do currently have £1 million revenue gap in the 25-26 budget. The report includes the revenue budgets for the Environment Committee, showing the transition from 22-23 through to 24-25. It shows the detailed income and expenditure budget. If members want more detail on this, please contact me or the Interim Director of Finance and Resources, and we'd be happy to provide you with more detailed information on these figures. Also, we are including the Q2 year-end forecast for the capital programme, and that's on Appendix 2. And then we have the capital programme that was approved as part of the budget setting last year in Appendix 3. And then finally, the city plan projects update budgets are detailed in Appendix 4. For now, this is more about providing information, and we will come back to you in January, but please do feel free to contact us direct if you have any further queries. Thank you.
So this is an information item, and some of these figures will be familiar with members because they will have gone through to the February Council. So they aren't things that you haven't seen before or passed before. But does anybody have any specific questions at this stage about the budgeting process or anything specific that's in the report? Councillor Sobchak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. At 3.2, it does say, just ask committee members to submit suggestions of potential service changes. And because I'm new to the process, I'd just like to know exactly what that means. Are we talking individual members, groups, or how is that process likely to work?
Thank you, through you, Chair. So I think the approach that members have taken in the past is to take it through group leaders or through the committee, so it could come from a variety of different places. But ideally, the group leader discussion is probably the best one.
Do we have any other questions or queries? Councillor Scott, then Councillor Ali, then Councillor Yildiz.
Could you help us get our head around the current budget gap by identifying where the greatest area of pressure is within the environment budget?
some concern and looks from
Yes,
officers.
I don't think it's as specific as that. It's a general budget gap that we have. It's not a case of there's a budget gap in the environment, there's a budget gap in the P&O side of things. There's a budget gap that we've got in terms of a quantum. So we're looking at all areas in terms of opportunities for savings. Sorry? Basically, yes, that's a good analogy.
Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. Just for clarification, on page 57, where it says regulatory services income and expenditures. Is this Worcestershire regulatory services or just Worcester City Council income?
That will be income relevant to Worcester City Council. So not the overall regulatory service element, it's what's specific to ourselves in the City Council.
Just for clarification though, is it the money that is took for our element of the Worcestershire regulatory services?
Yeah.
Councillor Udall.
Just a quick question on fees and charges. It's been a bit of a concern to me for some time, but quite rightly and quite naturally we have increased fees and charges on an annual basis. But are we starting to become outpricing our ability to actually generate the revenue by pricing ourselves out of the market simply because our prices are becoming too high? I'm just concerned that we're not always making a judgmental call about consumer ability to pay. And I do wonder if that is actually targeted or looked into during the process of determination of increases on fees and charges.
So whilst I'm new to the council, I know there's a holistic approach that's taken to fees and charges increases, and affordability is one of the measures that we look at, and that's considered when the fees and charges report comes through to P&R in February and then on to full council. So it is taken. We do review and report back on our income generation against income targets as well. So Q2 will be coming through to P&R in a couple of weeks' time, and we'll be looking at the variances then and what our income collection rates have been compared to what the targets have been. So that's the opportunity for us to do that sense checking.
You've just generated a question from me by doing that. It was, you're talking about P&R being the decision maker. I think what I would like as Chair of Environment is some reassurance that this committee has a say on the fees and charges that relate to things in the... I understand that it's important that P&R, there is a committee that has the overall scope of what's happening across the council, but I think it's absolutely crucial that we as Environment Committee have an input into those fees and charges that relate to areas of our work. The logical one, in terms of what Councillor Udall was talking about, is when you think about car parking charges. And I think one of the strengths of the last time that we looked at that was that we didn't just look at what are we doing in terms of putting up the charges. We looked at that, and there was a really good piece of work that officers had done where they benchmarked those against other comparable areas. And actually, even though we did what was a very considerable hike in our car parking charges, it still left us considerably below some of our peer areas. And I would like the reassurance that we can have that sort of level of input into fees and charges, and it won't just circumvent this committee and go straight to P&R.
I'm not 100% certain on what the approach is for the council's approach to fees and charges, but my understanding is it goes through to P&R, and that's a route for the committee. But
so Chair, just to clarify, at the moment that wouldn't happen, and it hasn't happened for some years, if ever, I believe. So that would be a significant change to the way in which the fee and charge decision is taken. Obviously, when the fee and charge paper goes in front of P&R committee, then members of this committee are more than welcome to go along and contribute to that debate. And obviously, you can have those conversations within your own groups as well. But to do that will be quite a step change from where we've been previously.
But certainly, we had the discussion about fees and charges for car parking. So how does that differ?
I think the reason for taking that to Environment Committee when we did that was that we hadn't increased car parking fees for 14 years. And we were conscious that it required significant debate at that level. What we've got now is we've got into a position where we're applying in line with inflation increases every year. and the P&R report will set out if we're proposing a below or an above inflation increase. There's a rationale and a justification for that. So unless there was a significant shift in how we were looking to apply an increase, at the moment the process wouldn't include it coming to a policy committee.
But where it is a significant, this is something that perhaps we need to raise and could be perhaps needs to get raised within the governance review. To be clear, I quite understand the fact that things, if they're just they're inflationary discussions, and clearly there is already an accepted wisdom when it's a policy decision and it is a policy shift that it does go to the relevant policy committee. But I suspect that that's not actually written in the constitution and is not clear, and I think it would be important to clarify that as part of the governance review. Councillor Udall.
I'm assuming, Chair, that if this committee had a specific concern about a specific fee or charge in any of its service areas, we could have a specific discussion about that fee and charge at the Environment Committee at any time during the year, and then ask through the committee system for a report to Policy and Resources and/or Council if we believed a change was required. Am I right in that understanding, or am I being mischievous?
I'm not sure about its progress through to P&R and to Council, but you know, it's within this committee's gift to ask for a report within the constitutional responsibility of the committee. That's at the discretion of Chair and Vice Chair.
So you've opened a whole issue here, Richard, that was no questions, and now we're all debating things. So, Councillor Lewin and then Councillor Rudge.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just going to make a statement, really. When you look at these figures, you see actually how important our parking is for the council. You talk about £1 million deficit. It's really important that we charge correctly for our services. And actually, you know, if we want to be a functioning council delivering things that people need and want, we do have to charge things correctly. And I do understand that there's careful work done with comparisons and all sorts of things done when we do this. But, you know, just looking at that, we know we've got the impact of the bereavement income, perhaps with in the forthcoming year. Again, that makes the parking more important, you know, and then you can see the street scene expenditure. You know, it's big. It's big for our green spaces. They take a lot of money to keep nice. This is something we have to understand, that if we are short of money, if we do not get enough money from the government, there will be things that are looked at that people expect to happen, which we will have to look at to not do. And that, for me, is a deep concern. Because when you look at the expenditure for street scene and parks, we have to look at our statutory things that we have to do. And so many of the services that we do are non-statutory. You know, enforcement for planning is not statutory. People would not understand that. They would be so frustrated that it isn't, and that if that didn't happen, what would happen? So, you know, this is funding, but also getting the income of the City Council up. You know, so I would really welcome members coming forward with ideas for income generation. I think that's more important now than ever. So thank you.
Chair, Cathy just made a really good point, actually. Obviously, you will get a budget paper in January as well. Now, as part of that budget paper, you won't get a draft set of fees and charges, but that is another opportunity for you, having had time to talk within your groups about income generation, where you can, as a committee, raise things and recommend things onto P&R in February.
Thank you, Chair. We've discussed before in this committee about the possibility of offering the service of brown bins for 12 months instead of its current 8 or 9, I'm not sure exactly. Is that a possible way forward? And if so, could we increase the charges and raise some money through that option?
Chair, I know... oh, sorry.
Sorry. We are currently looking at that because it was requested at the last committee to look at a 12-month cycle for the garden waste. So that is something that is also in the projects for the waste team. but obviously we will increase fees if we do introduce a 12-month service. So we are looking at it.
Councillor Scott.
Correct me if I'm wrong, reading this report, I can't actually see any update on the revenue and how we're progressing through the year according to our budgets. It doesn't show how far short we are or how above our projected income and expenditure are we at this stage in the financial year. Have I misread it? I've not seen that. Do we report it on other occasions?
Yes, it goes to P&R directly. Q2 will go to P&R on the 19th of November.
And will that come back to this committee?
No.
So there's...
I think this comes down to we need just to be clear on the governance of where things are going, because there's obviously some confusion amongst various people. And I think that's the purpose of the governance review.
Chair, I think this is something that's probably unique to a committee system as well. It's very difficult to break budgets down by committee, and certainly to be able to present them in a clear way. So I think there's a number of practical reasons for why we don't do that.
So the purpose of this report is really just to summarise the process we'll be going through in terms of the totality of the budget as we head for assessing it for next year. And we wait and see how the discussions go within the groups and in policy and resources.
Personally, I think the thing that we take away the most from this is that as members who aren't on P&R, we need to make sure that we are watching we have a responsibility in the committee system to be watching the P&R papers, to be discussing those within group leaders and to make sure that we're cited on those. Okay, is everybody happy does anybody have any other questions, or are they happy to note that report and we will move on? I do think it's highlighted the importance of this committee being aware of the wider agenda and not just waiting for everything to come to this committee. And clearly, if there are things that are within our remit, we have the role that we can ask to those to be looked at, as Councillor Udall pointed out. So we need to do that, but we need to do that in an environment in which we are aware of the budget constraints that we've got. There is no point in us coming and saying, we'd like to fund all these things, because clearly we're not going to be able to. Okay, with that, I'm going to thank Cathy for that. Probably more debate than you were potentially expecting, and some wider issues. And we're going to move on to item 9, which is the Air Quality Action Plan.
Good evening, councillors. Thank you. As you're aware, you saw the draft Air Quality Action Plan prior to its consultation earlier this year. The plan was sent to DEFRA for comments and was published online for public consultation for a 2-month period between July and September of this year. DEFRA's feedback was that on the basis of the evidence provided, the conclusions reached in the Air Quality Action Plan were accepted and acceptable, and the comments are included in the final Air Quality Action Plan, but in summary they wanted further integration with transport policies, additional information on source apportionment, a further technical appendix, include information on when compliance with or without the measures is expected, and set out how Worcester City Council will ensure air quality standards and objectives are to be maintained after compliance has been achieved. We had 66 public responses, and the details of which are included in the report. There was no feedback from any of the statutory consultees, and in lieu of the consultation responses, the draft report was amended and follows to lead to the final version that is in front of you now. A copy of our responses to DEFRA are included at the end of Appendix A. And in terms of just as a brief summary of the changes in the main body of the plan, section 4.1, the consultation and stakeholder engagement was updated to reflect the consultation. Paragraph 4.25, the predicted emissions reduction was inserted as DEFRA had requested. Paragraph 4.26, maintaining compliance was also inserted. There was additional data for 2023 from the annual status report that was finalised after the consultation went live has been included. And some further text has been provided on table 4.5, including further detail on EV uptake measures that will be provided in a separate Appendix G in due course. There is a requirement to send the final document to DEFRA by the 1st of December 2024 deadline. But the bulk of the changes are in the appendices of the Air Quality Action Plan and Appendix A, in particular, the response to the consultation. Chris and I are happy to take any questions any of you might have. Thank you.
Before we move to questions, I'm just going to ask Lloyd to come in and just, as members will recall, there was a governance process that we agreed with this, that it would go to licensing committee, for licensing committee to have a conversation and make sure that their views are fed into this committee before it goes any further. Clearly, we haven't got anything here. It's going to be verbal, and I understand that Lloyd is going to talk us through some of the feedback, but I am also aware that there's a number of people in this room who are also members of licensing committee, and they may wish to add things after Lloyd has spoken.
Thank you, Chair, and only very briefly. There are four things I think that were noted in particular, and I think it was more around maximising opportunities for these. So they weren't things that weren't in the plan. It was just trying to do as much as possible with some of the things that are in the plan, but some of the things that were highlighted. So there was certainly a discussion around school travel plans and working with the County Council, in particular the Education Department, in trying to push more of those. The uptake in Worcester City is still relatively low. There was a strong discussion around anti-idling of all types of vehicles, but including taxis. And again, that's within the plan. And again, I know there's a discussion going on in the background around the Council's powers around that. There was a sort of a word or a signal warning around our plans for HGV parking at Croft Road car park, and just to think about the impact of that as and when we do it. And again, that's a conversation we can pick up with the County Council and with the Highways Authority. As we would expect, we're on the journey of EV charging, but again, there was a clear message around trying to push that and maximise that every opportunity that we take. As you say, Chair, there were members at that committee. If I've missed anything, I'm sure those things will get picked up. The other point that was made was around particulate matter. I think Mark may have discussed this at the moment in terms of this quality action plan. Particulate matter can't and doesn't form part of it. However, there is work ongoing around particulate matter. We've got the new monitors now, which are monitoring particulate matter, and there's obviously a live conversation around that as well. So that doesn't mean it's not being looked at and worked on because it isn't in this particular air quality action plan. That work is ongoing, and we'll get to understand that better and how we can deal with it more in the future. So happy to stop there, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Councillor Cooper first.
Thank you. Just two things that I'd like to add from the discussion at licensing. One, sorry, David, I've mentioned this lots of times before, but it was a plea for EV charging for coaches, because we do get lots of coaches with tourists to our beautiful city. EV coaches do exist, and it would be really good if they had specific charging. And the other one was not just around school travel plans, but it was around business travel plans. It was noted that there was only one business that has a business travel plan. So promoting those two things would be fantastic. Thank you.
Did any officers want to comment on that? Are we happy to move on? I think that's noting the points. Okay. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased with this report. There's some very positive responses from the public saying that they do support, but there is also some negativity. Do we put much weight? They are quite low figures. Do we put much weight into some of these comments, or do we just deal with the ones that we practically support the plan? There is that negativity. It always exists out there. Do we carry that forward in any way, or do we just go, basically?
If I may, Chair, respond to the question. Yes, we recognise that some people aren't happy with certain elements of the report. Each of the measures within the report have been considered in detail, They are ones that we know can deliver the objective that we're trying to achieve with the action plan, and the air quality action plan is a legal requirement. So whilst yes, we do note those comments, we have to produce it. The plan has been produced in accordance with the guidance set out by DEFRA, and so they're not valid in that sense. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Udall.
First of all, Chair, can I thank Lloyd Griffiths for giving the praise of the meeting of the licensing committee. I failed to take notes, so I appreciate his assistance in helping the committee understand what was discussed. One of the two issues which I think does require a bit of highlighting is about the issue of idling. It's not just taxes, as it says in the report. Other vehicles are just as much guilty, if not more so, than taxis, including public transport in the form of buses and trains. Now, I know I raised this at the licensing meeting. I do wonder if we've got any view back about the issue of train idling, which is a problem in parts of St John's. And also, I think this can't go by without me making my almost every meeting plea for us to actually do more with the county council to achieve on-street parking measures for recharging. For electric vehicles. We're not going to change the way we have cars in this city or anywhere else unless we actually make it easy and accessible for people to have on-street parking charging machines. And if the county council still continue to refuse to allow that to happen, we're not going to succeed. So I do think we need to up the ante a bit on that and make our points known and understood to the county council that their position is, and I hate to use the word, but I'm going to unsustainable. It's just not going to carry on like this. We've got to change. We've got to be able to charge vehicles on the curbside, and we've got to find a way to enable that to happen. Whether that's through machines or charging or through cable gullers, it doesn't really matter. We need to find a way to do it, and simply keep on saying no is not an option.
And I think that we as a committee made our views on EV charging quite clear to the County Council, and that feedback is going back loud and strong to the County Council of our views on that. I don't know whether you want to pick up on some of the other points that quite a lot of points there that Councillor Udall has made, but I suspect you've heard some of them before, so be prepared.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Udall. Along with a lot of the discussion points that Lloyd has fed back from Licensing Environmental Health Committee, they're all elements concerning the wider issue of air quality in the city that need to be considered and should be considered. The action plan itself has to focus on measures that have been costed and we know are going to deliver the emission reduction and relate to nitrogen dioxide in specific hotspot areas across the city. Once this process has been completed in terms of producing the action plan in its final stage, it will become a live document, and we'll work with that in trying to ensure that the nitrogen dioxide issues in the city are resolved. But alongside that, we'll be working on a wider air quality strategy across the county, which will deal with a lot of the issues that you have mentioned, in particular particulates, as was mentioned. So all of those will feed into that wider strategy.
So I think when we're feeding back on this, we need to be very clear in the minutes that we are, if we are minded to support this, we're minded to support this with a view to it doesn't go far enough, and Worcester City is looking for us to move further and faster outside of this. I've got a number of people, just so that people know. I think it's got Councillor Cross next, then Councillor Scott, then Councillor Smith, and Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I'm slightly troubled by the fact that we've got just 66 responses. I mean, out of 110,000 residents, and I guess at least half a dozen of the 66 will be members responding, perhaps way more than that. So I'm just slightly, I mean, it's a little bit like readers' comments in Worcester News sometimes, some of the extreme views that are put across. It's really hard to make meaningful, I mean, encouraging to hear you say that it's driven per, the plan is driven by DEFRA guidelines. It's really important to reflect resident views, but I feel that we're somehow not quite capturing them. I'm not sure I have the answers. It's just to throw that sort of caveat in there amongst the comments that are within that. But how do you feel about the engagement level, and what more can we do to drive it?
Thank you, Chair. It's a very technical area of expertise. It's quite, the quality action plan is limited in that we're only looking at nitrogen dioxide and we're focusing on our hotspot areas. So the scope for public engagement in that is quite limited. I think the air quality strategy and the wider work we'll be doing on that, we have greater engagement. And I think the recent survey we did around air quality demonstrated that we had a far greater return rate on that, but that was it was aimed specifically at the public and their engagement in that process, because we wanted to address a far wider breadth of issues. This was specifically for resolving issues in discrete locations. So I think we had sufficient engagement from those who wanted to be engaged in the process.
Thank you. Councillor Scott next.
Having said that, and in the limited technical scope of it, I think it's a really excellent document and does the job thoroughly. And it is a useful pointer to some of the actions which we do need to tackle nitrous dioxide. And by so doing, we will reduce, other benefits will come from some of the actions to reduce traffic. And reducing traffic, in particular hotspots, is the key aim of this. A lot of the delivery of the reduction in traffic, it will be down to how the county council operates. And I note that the county council co-chair the working group and are present in several different forms of officer life on the working group. Can you tell us where we are up to with the county sign-off of this policy? That's my first question. The second one, I thought Richard would have done this, but can I note that tonight is a fine night to be talking about particulates?
Chair, if I may, as recommended by DEFRA in the policy guidance note on local air quality management, we've submitted the air quality action plan to the Director of Public Health for sign-off. So they've received that, and we are in discussions with them concerning that.
So just as it's going through our committee cycles, will it be going through their formal structures? And how long have they had it to give you their opinion on whether or not it's an adequate plan?
Am I working? Yeah. Chair, we don't believe it's going to go through any governance process at member level at county, but certainly at officer level they've worked extremely well with us, been extremely supportive, and it will probably receive sign-off at a senior officer level. We're not aware it will go through the council's member governance system.
Concerning that some county councillors, excluding those who were present today, probably those of a different party, aren't taking this to the level of seriousness that we would want them to, because we would expect them to be wanting to see this and wanting to feed into this. But then we can only control what we can as the City Council, and that's the area that we want to, and I think it's important that we are engaging in having this discussion. So, and I've still got a number of people to speak, so Councillor Smith next.
Thank you, Chair. I've recently had a resident complaining about noxious fumes from wood-burning stoves, and I can't find anything to do with wood-burning stoves in the report. I wondered if we've got any sort of a policy about wood-burning stoves, and if not, can we develop one, please?
Thank you, Chair. As Mark referred to, the plan is specifically in response to the requirement by DEFRA to address the air quality management area, which is declared for nitrogen dioxide, whereas wood-burning stoves, the primary air pollutant is particulate matter. And as we've already referred to, we are really at the beginning of our understanding of particulate matter across the county. We will have some data on it for the first time at the beginning of next year, when we've got a calendar year's worth of data from the new low-cost sensors which have been erected. The big question then is what do we do about it? So there isn't actually any policies in place about wood-burning stoves per se. At the moment, it's a lot of work to do to then work with colleagues across the county from all kinds of disciplines as to what we can actually do to take action against it to reduce the impact of particulate matter.
Councillor Lewin. Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say thank you again. I mean, I'm sure you've come to loads of committees talking about this. You must be quite tired of it, but you must feel like hopefully there's a weight coming off your shoulders soon. But of course, what it says in the, I'm really pleased this is a live document. You know, that's so important because this is a live issue. You know, I'm a bit of a geek. I subscribe to Air Quality News. And there was an article last week which talked about some research that was done looking at the risk of PM 2.5 with asthma in children, saying about a third of cases of asthma is linked to PM 2.5, and that was looking at, you know, a sample of 15.6 million children from 15 countries and 10.1 million adults from 20 countries. I think the problem is a lot of this is invisible, and it's not something that people like. It's not like eating your breakfast. It's not in front of you, but we need people to be more aware of this. So this being here now is a mark in the sand for me. I would like us to work towards air quality that meets the World Health Organization standard, and I think we probably have that ambition, but we're starting with this, I would say. And obviously I'm really pleased with the PM 2.5 and happy to discuss what we do about it afterwards. Thank you. The World Health Organization has got a stricter standard for the gases. For me, this isn't far enough. We know that there is no safe level of air pollution.
What's
PM 2.5, particulate matter of a certain size, gets into your lungs. Yeah, gets into lungs. Yeah.
Can we try and ensure that you go via me so that we can actually, because otherwise people are waiting a long time to talk.
Apologies, Chair.
No,
My instinct was to be helpful.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's in danger of actually some members who are waiting for some.
Yeah.
Had you finished?
Do you know what? That's the other point, really, isn't it? Because you lose your flow a little bit. I am sorry. I'm very supportive and supportive of the future work. Thank you.
That's a statement rather than a need for a response. So we'll go straight to Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm wondering, through your Chair, if officers would be able to help in that there was very recently a business within Councillor Lewin and my ward that were burning waste, which was very toxic in smelling to residents. There was some confusion about who the responsible body for enforcing that is. Residents were very worried about how toxic the fumes were smelling, and it was smelling like they were burning plastic, and it wasn't like wood and leaves and things. So I'm wondering who would be responsible for that and how we can prevent things like that happening in the future, please. Thank you.
Chair, I'll respond directly to Councillor Cooper offline on that particular case. It's landed in my inbox, so I am aware of it, and I'll pick that up with Councillor Cooper directly if that's okay. But there's a range of powers that we can deal with, something like that range from waste right through to nuisance. So we can deal with it. What you need to know is who is going to deal with it. So I'll come back directly.
All members being made aware of the process in such circumstances. I would imagine there's some link there to the fire service as well.
Chair, if I can find some time, I will prepare. We'll prepare a briefing note on that. We'll prepare something brief and to the point, Chair.
I think what we're agreeing is some general advice where councillors can go when this issue comes. It obviously is very specific on a case-by-case basis, and I don't think officers have the capacity to be breaking down case-by-case basis, but some general advice of where we go and who we talk to when we don't know, so because otherwise we all just default to Lloyd and everything goes into Lloyd's inbox, which becomes somewhat challenging. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Chair. One thing that we do discuss, I mean, we do discuss the health implications, and it occurred to me while we were discussing the children. I know 8 adults with having to manage asthma, and only 2 of them developed asthma from birth. The rest have developed asthma later on beyond the age of 50, and 2 of them are keen cyclists. So they're breathing in traffic fume, and they're following an active life, and they're developing asthma.
So I think what we've come to is, I think you can safely say that we've noted the contents of the report. From looking around the room and those members who are members of licensing, I think that we have had feedback and people are comfortable that the issues discussed in licensing have been raised and that we've been able to take those into account. We are being asked to approve this report, so I will move that to the vote shortly, but just want to caveat that with, and we've already flagged that to Margaret about the minutes, that we would like it recorded that if we are supporting this, it's supporting this, recognising it's the parameters in which this is produced, and that we as a City Council Environment Committee would like to see work and are very much looking forward to the wider work that you're going to be doing, and would be happy as elected members to doing whatever we can as a City Council to be encouraging other district councils and the county councils and businesses and everyone who can to contribute to this, because it can't be one organisation alone, it's got to be everyone working together. With that caveat in mind, are people happy to approve this? You've got 2 very nervous officers sitting here who've been doing a lot of work on this, thinking, please make sure you're not going to disagree with this. So, yeah. And can we formally thank you for this very hefty document that we have? We all needed to be spending all our bedtime reading things, but I'm sure you'll be glad to see this formally signed off. And I'm sure we now have a cure for insomnia. So anyone, is everybody happy with sort of raise of hands to formally support this? That is unanimous, so thank you. And we move on to goals. I had seen an early draft of this report, and it did amuse me that an extra paragraph had appeared in 5.4 that I hadn't seen originally, but I'm not surprised to have seen develop in this report. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just run through the pertinent parts of the report. It provides a review of the work undertaken in 2024 in line with the work programme approved at this committee last year. And the format of the report is, as you will recall from previous years. You'll see that we focused on proactive and reactive nest and egg and chick removal under an organisational licence. And we're one of the few local authorities to be granted such a licence, and most pest controllers no longer undertake gold control work because they haven't been successful in gaining licences. As part of that, 125 nests were removed, 204 eggs and 8 chicks. The requirements for compliance with the organisational licence have been met. We've submitted our documents to Natural England, who are the authority that issue the licence. And as part of that, we must identify harm to human health and safety. So for any nest and egg removal, it's deemed to be lethal control, and we have to ensure that we've got harm, which is quite a high bar. We can't just do it unless we've identified that. Where it's not possible to remove nest or eggs from a location, be that because we haven't identified harm or that we've identified it late in the season and chicks have hatched, and we have undertaken some chick removal, as noted, 8 chicks, and they are sometimes those birds from those nests, or they could be wandering chicks on the ground, which are then prone to welfare concerns. They are rehabilitated and released at a rural location later in the season with rings on, so we can track their movements and observe how they react and are different to those birds that were reared on roofscapes. We focused on nest and egg removal in the girl exclusion zone areas. So there's the Tithing and the areas around there, St Mary's Street, RGS, those kind of locations. The High Street, the Guildhall area up to Fish Street, including the east section of Copenhagen Street. Weir Lane in St John's and Waterside in Diglas. And the report has some further details around the work in each of those areas. That has been complemented by gold proofing. We've done gold proofing on 16 properties across the city in multiple locations on each of those properties themselves, because it could be gutters or parapets, it could be the in between the pitches of the roofs where we've done the proofing. And that is done alongside the nest and egg removal. So whilst we're there removing the nest and eggs, we're then doing the proofing at the same time, so we don't need to go back. And we've obviously focused therefore in the gull exclusion zones where we're already doing that work. That is done with the consent of the landowner and predominantly where match funding from the owner has been made available, or owners. And some proofing has been possible outside of that gull exclusion zone where we've been able to secure match funding and had reserves to be able to do that. And obviously, there are some landowners who are doing things independently across the city as well, in addition to all this work. The report also confirms that we undertook a gull population survey this year. We've done it several times before, and the last one was done in 2022, and it's kind of recommended it's done every 2 years, so you've got a clear idea of what your gull population looks like and where they are. We've got 1,188 breeding pairs in the city. That's an increase of 5.4% since the last survey, which is 2.55% increase year on year, which is roughly 29 pairs per year increase. The author of the report did suggest actually that Worcester could support a much larger population, but the activities that we've undertaken, certainly in discrete locations of the city, has had an impact. Because whilst Blackpool trading estates and the retail parks across, like Shire Business Park, host the majority of the population, followed by the city centre, in the city centre the numbers are down on previous years, certainly in the centre of the city. And some displacement has been to the wider city centre area, and there's been displacement between Shire Business Park and the Blackpool trading estates because of work that businesses have done on their roofs independently. The work programme for 2025, we're looking to continue to work with Natural England on updating, amending and adapting the organisational licence application process and monitoring. And they're very keen to work with us on that, I should say, and we're very grateful for them for doing that. Again, the focus is proposed on proactive and reactive nest and egg removal in the gull exclusion zone areas, because we know we've got harm there. We've identified people who are particularly impacted by gulls. So we can operate quite easily there. And also we've done a lot of the work in getting contacts with landowners, getting access into up to roofs to be able to do the work. And that is where we've got the most harm. So why wouldn't we focus there? And do that alongside subsidised gold proofing, because we're already using the cherry pickers as normal, and that we've got a small amount of the budget left that we can use in other areas if necessary. The report also sets out additional gold proofing work that could be undertaken should members wish to consider those. They would not form part of the current budget that we have in relation to that. So if I just briefly set those out, a nest and egg removal with subsidised gold proofing, as the population survey suggested, displacement around the core city centre area. So where we've done the work in the centre of the city, some girls have found that unattractive to nesting and have moved just slightly outside of that, such as Green Hill and Hill Avenue area, Battenall, Barbourne, Merriman's Hill, those kind of locations. There's the next one is subsidised nest and egg removal on the BT building, which is a significant population there of gulls, quite close to the city centre. And so with getting access to that one building, and that would be subject to the landowner's consent, obviously, we would be able to prevent the successful breeding of a significant proportion of the population in the city centre. And finally, anti-poaching measures along the High Street and Cathedral Square areas to try and ensure that we don't get food snatching from gulls in those locations. And each of those have been costed up so that you could consider those. You're asked to note the work undertaken to date in the review, which is recommendation 1.1, endorse the proposed work programme for next year as section 3 of the report, which is recommendation 1.2, with the option to propose additional work in recommendation 1.3 and associated additional funding that would be required as recommendation 1.4. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for this. Yeah, it is a significant concern, the girls. Are we just shifting the problem if we just keep making the area inhospitable? You know, they've moved off to other areas, or can we actually reduce the quantity and actually reduce the issue rather than just shift it? And I raised this sort of snatching of food with the pavement licensing coming in. I think we're going to have to stay on top of that, to make sure that people who are asking for pavement licenses are going to keep those tables clean. We don't want people swooping. We don't want the encouragement. I've certainly been to seaside places where children have been sort of attacked, dive bomb from the sky. We certainly do not want that in the city. So I'd like to stop proactively by dealing with the girls and keeping them under control before we end up with a significant issue that we had a couple of years ago. It does seem to be that we have got less, I feel.
If I may, Chair, I'm glad you made that last comment, because the key thing for us is tackling where we've got harm. So we knew we had harm. We had people who were significantly impacted in the city centre, either their mental health or physical harm, or the risk of that. And so we've addressed those areas. I know from our liaison with them, they have felt the benefit of the work we've done, because we've done it in those specific locations. There will be some displacement doing it that kind of method. The number of complaints have not been as significant as previously, which would suggest some have been displaced to areas where they're not giving rise to harm. The authority that we operate under the organisation licence for, so Natural England, the regulatory body, require us not to reduce the population size, because they are trying to protect an endangered species, is particularly in the herring gull, but also in the lesser blackback gull. And so we have to operate in a particular way where we're not removing the entire population from the city. What we're doing is removing the negative impacts of some birds and where they're breeding. And there'll be lots of your residents that do welcome the birds in the city, but we recognise there are a significant proportion of the population that are adversely impacted, and we're trying to assist them. So in the work that we're doing, we are trying to assist residents and remove the harm where they feel it. So hopefully that is recognised. In relation to snatching food, we have already done quite a bit of work with the environmental health officers that work in WRS alongside myself, to ensure that they are providing suitable advice to those businesses in the city centre where food snatching might be an issue. And hopefully that has been benefit to some of those businesses. We'll look to work with Worcester Bid across the city to ensure that that is also repeated through their liaisons. And the gull officer that you've employed will be doing the same on his daily rounds around the city to do that. So hopefully that will ensure that food snatching is something that is a rarity rather than a common occurrence. And last year we particularly focused hawking in the Cathedral Square area, because we had in the previous year identified a pair of birds that were identifying a target and swooping near them to try and get people to drop the food. And it was a tactic that we saw was being learned between the birds in Bath. And so from our experience there, we didn't want that to be repeated in the city. So we didn't have that last year. So hopefully we've removed that, but we don't want it to come back. So thank you.
Councillor Cross.
Thank you. I'd like to understand better how well received and how good the uptake is of our gull proofing services from businesses and property owners, and their willingness to take up the council gull work rather than private contractors, and ultimately what feedback we get post completion of work, so we can gauge our market performance compared to other gull control companies. This can help us gauge our potential revenue generation from this as well. So I appreciate it's possibly a net cost, but how can we reduce the cost? And how is the market, how is the price sensitivity effectively of our services?
Thank you, Chair. This is quite a difficult question to answer. In terms of uptake to gull proofing, that's the easy bit, so I'll start with that. We've restricted it in previous years, so the report talks about focusing on gull exclusion zones because we're already there with the cherry pickers or the mobile elevated working platforms, to give them the proper title, and they're the costly bit. So we've tended to fund that because we're doing it as part of nest and egg removal, and we get them to pay for the actual proofing materials on their roofs. And that has worked quite well because there's cost benefit to us because you don't have to go back because we proofed it. And so we focused that in the gull exclusion zones, and it's largely been successful. We've been able to work with neighbours because they want to do something, and then they galvanise their neighbours either side so that, yes, they've done theirs, but they're not going to move to the neighbouring property. So it is small scale, but it has to be for the budget that we've got. I would also add, it's a very new area. I mean, whilst gulls have been in our cities for a number of years now, and lots of people complain about them, the actual tackling them, because of the legality of the protection of wild birds, it's not an area where many people have much expertise. So you've got members of staff in WRS who have got knowledge about gulls that nobody else in the country has because of the work that we've done here. We've got contractors we work with who have worked with us to develop proofing solutions that in the main are working. We're tweaking them each year as we go forward because the birds are clever and they move and they adapt. So we have to do that. So part of the reason why Natural England are working with us so closely is because they recognise the expertise we've got and the approach we're taking and the support we have from yourselves to focus on proofing and non-lethal control as well as trying to do the lethal control where we have to. So performance would be difficult because for some roofs it works really well, but it's such an emerging and developing market. I think it would be difficult at that stage. We have in recent years sent customer satisfaction forms to those who've asked for advice and assistance, and they form part of the report that goes to the WRS Joint Board on the customer satisfaction survey. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Scott.
Thank you. On behalf of residents of my ward, Cathedral Ward, which includes the stress areas, particularly around Fish Street, Copenhagen Street, and include Diglis Water, residents are very grateful for the improvements which have been made in their conditions. But I'm very sad about this whole thing, really, because gulls are a endangered species. Herring gulls are on the red list of species which are under threat. Lesser black-backed gulls are amber, which isn't reflected in the report. It's a real dilemma because as a caring council, and we're keen on biodiversity, but some of the most dramatic species of our avian life are under threat, and we inevitably are locked into moving them on elsewhere. And I just hope that solutions can be found. I'm not so sure. I haven't heard complaints about all the buildings you've talked about. I think I'd like us to avoid chasing gulls just because they're in existence. It should be about responding to complaints. I have experience of this. I spent a lot of time in the northeast where there's an active kittiwake colony on the Newcastle quayside, and I worked for many years in offices in North Shields by the Fish Quay, so I know all about gulls, and maybe I've grown accustomed to them over the years. But I thank you for the support you're doing, but I think we should note with some sadness that these birds are under threat globally, and that's down to the degradation of marine foodstuffs for them. The degradation of our seas is undoubtedly the causal factor of all this, and Worcester has to bear the brunt of those larger problems. Thank you.
Chair, if I may, thank you. Because you've invested in the work in gulls, we've gathered a lot of data concerning that, and we undertook a significant piece of work a few years ago on ringing a significant number of birds. So we are tracking those, seeing what happens, trying to understand what our interventions are doing, so that it's not just about removing them from an area, it's trying to understand how we can protect those who are vulnerable in our community from the adverse impacts and leave them alone elsewhere. I have had discussions with members about areas of the city that have got large proportions of the gull population, such as Blackpool, and how in the main we are not doing any work in those locations. But if we found a resident who was particularly adversely impacted and they hit that benchmark of harm, then we would assist them in tackling that particular bird or location where they were impacted. But otherwise, we're largely focused in the city centre and locations where we have got harm. We're getting reports on our bird movements all the time, and I think in time we'll have a greater understanding about the birds that we're releasing in a rural location that were initially hatched in an urban one, how that has impacted them, and whether they are returning to an urban lifestyle or whether they are going to go to a rural one. I think there's lots of unknowns, and hopefully, because of your funding of the work, we will have a greater picture in terms of the birds themselves, but also in terms of what the industry needs to do to either encourage them to move to a particular location or to avoid another location. Thank you.
Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. The budget for this work is obviously extremely tight, and looking at the work you've done in past years, you've done an awful lot with it. So I think that's what members can be reassured of, that there's no unnecessary work being carried out, and it is extremely targeted, and it has to be for the licensing. So I'm very supportive of the additional funding, which are 3 projects which are targeting specific issues in the city, which has been brought by the knowledge of the gull officer, who has been looking at where the gulls are in the city and what they're doing. And I think it's really important that the High Street does not have gulls swooping on people. I think we want our High Street to be busy, welcoming, and a place where people want to spend money, and spend their time. It's important for our economy. So I'm really supportive of the 3 projects. I'm very supportive of non-lethal methods and prevention. So the work that you've been doing to make the protections much better and longer lasting means that this money, even though it's small, a little 2,000 budget uplift for something and 4.5 for something else, we're actually putting in protection which will last a few years. I'm just wondering how long protection generally lasts, or does different types last different lengths of time? Thank you.
Through you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, it depends on the protection. So each roof is assessed on its suitability for whichever method is appropriate. You tend to find the herring gulls go to chimney pots on tall chimneys, so that would be a different method to a large flat roof. So we would look at each individual roof based on its merits and how long the growth proofing measures last. Some of them are almost permanent features, others I'm sure do have a lifespan, but because they are so new and emerging, some of these, in terms of their interaction with gulls, we don't know. So yeah, we're into our 2nd year for some of them, so hopefully they'll last for many more, but it would depend on each measure. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Udall, then Councillor Lodge.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I really do welcome this report. It is a very good report and explains a lot of detail which confuses and upsets a lot of people. I've got no doubt that the increase, especially in St John's, is being noticed. And I regularly get complaints, especially at the breeding season, when gulls become more hostile to residents when they're on top of residential properties. So I think we are doing this proportionately, but I haven't mentioned this before, but I am beginning to start to worry a little that we are being a little bit disproportionate in some of our discussions about the nature of the problem of gulls. When I think that if not careful, we will take the eye off the ball and looking at what the huge problem of other problems of pests which exist within a city, and I'm thinking particularly of rats, which do cause more problems for a large number of people. They are endemic in the city, and we have plenty of residential and commercial properties which are providing harbourage for rats. So I do worry that we're spending a lot of energy and time on the gull problem, which is well right and justified, but we're not paying so much attention to a problem which is actually more problematic to us, more harmful and more dangerous, which is the growing rat population in the city. And I'm getting a little bit concerned about that. But obviously there's not a lot which we can do about that, but let's not forget the traditional enemy, and it's the rat.
If I may, Chair, I also have the responsibility for subsidised pest control service and sewer baiting in the city. So if residents do identify rats that are coming from Severn Trent sewers, then I've got the budget that can undertake the sewer baiting to resolve that. And similarly, the residents on qualifying benefits benefit from the ability to be able to have free rat treatment. So the WRS duty officers will be able to assist them with identifying who can assist.
I think this draws us back to something that was mentioned earlier, and that's that WRS do an awful lot of good services that actually a lot of councillors don't necessarily know about. So without being careful not to encourage you to be over-inundated with councillors with lots of issues that you then just don't have the capacity to deal with, I do think, because we've had quite a lot of turnover in the council in the last election, it would be useful if you've got some sort of little guide leaflet that just gives people the outline of who to contact about particular things. Because I know we just tend to default, well, that's probably Worcester Regulatory Services, but we're not quite sure. And so if you do have something that exists, I think that's something that would be useful to put into a general circulation, just particularly for new members. But that's an aside. Councillor Rudd.
Thank you, Chair. I wonder whether we can tie this in with the biodiversity strategy to look at more places for gulls to inhabit. I'm thinking about basically open water where they can bathe and feed. Even the industrial estate being built on the other side of the M5, Junction 6, while that was being built, there was a huge pond that was created inadvertently, and there were hundreds of gulls that would go there and then go back to Blackpool, I think, to roost and then come out again. Forgive me for sounding like a one-track pony, but or whatever the expression is. Offerton Lane had hundreds of gulls when it was open water. It was a fantastic place because there was somewhere for them to feed again and somewhere for them to bathe. And as it's got overgrown, there's less and less open water and they don't come. So I wonder whether, as part of our biodiversity strategy, we could look at places that they could inhabit other than the city centre. And that would keep Mr. Scott happy. Oh.
David, you could know they're all pointing to you for the answer to this question.
Keep your head down.
I'll say, David, I think all we can say, Chair, is we can go away and have a think about it. But you know, we have a strategy that's not currently in there, and there's a lot of work to be done within it. But we can take it away and see if there are any synergies that we can work into it.
Do we have any other comments or questions about this particular report? In that case, I'm going to suggest that we go through on each item. So we've noted the work to date. Are people happy to endorse the proposed goal? So item 1.2, are people happy to endorse the proposed goal control work programme as detailed in section 3, as in the bit that is in base budget? Are people happy? Can we have a show of hands if people are happy to endorse that? That is unanimous. Are people minded to support the additional proposal of the extra work that's in section 4? Can we have a show of hands? That again is unanimous. So I'm assuming that actually in order to do that you are happy to endorse the recommendation for Policy and Resourcing Committee that an additional budget of 10,500 for 2025 is allocated.
I think that's an additional on top of the item 4, isn't it?
My understanding that the 10,500 is the money that will be the items that are in section 4. So we're understanding we've agreed the base budget and the use of that base budget. Then there's the additional proposals which come up to a total of 10,500. So if we are minded to endorse that, which I think people have just indicated that they are, we then have to, it's a formality to endorse the fact that that needs to go forward to policy and resources.
Yeah, sorry, beg pardon.
So I'm assuming since everybody agreed to section 4, they're happy to agree the recommendation around the funding. Yeah, okay. In that case, thank you very much. That's all agreed, and thank you to Mark for all the work that you do and the detail of the report. And thank you for being here at this time of night. We've only got 2 items left. Okay, we're going to just have a short recess of 5 minutes and then we'll come back. Okay, welcome back everybody after our brief recess. We've just got 2 items left, and so I'm hoping this won't take us very long. We're going to first go, I think we're on by now on item 11, which is in relation to the council motion on AstroTurf.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, I'll keep this brief. So this responds to the council motion from July, and there were 3 elements to it. The first, which we're discharging by bringing the report to committee. What we're talking about is the 3G artificial pitches. So that isn't AstroTurf, but obviously it was in a previous life. The issue at hand is the fact that 3G pitches use rubber crumb as a shock absorbent material. So members will have seen it. It's the sort of small black rubberized crumb tyre. Before I go into what the plan is and where we are in terms of the advice, I think it is just worth noting that the role that 3G pitches play, particularly in Worcester, not only are they a sort of a sporting facility, and we've heard stories about teams having to travel way outside of Worcester to train and to play, but they're also a place where people can come together and socialise as well. So there is a wider benefit to these pitches. In terms of the pitches that we have in Worcester, paragraph 2.7 sets those out. And we've also put in there for members what the indicative date of next replacement is, because a big part of the council motion was that the next time we have a new site or there's an opportunity to replace a surface, then we bring that to Environment Committee for you to have a view on that before we go to Communities Committee for decision. And you will see there the next opportunity we have to think about this is when we renew St John's Sports Centre, the 2 small-sided pitches there, and that's due in 2026. So if by 2026 or in advance of that, the technology has moved on, or whether it hasn't, we will bring a report to this committee to set out what our plan is, what the current technology is, so you can have a view on that before we go to the Communities Committee. And that will also discharge a key part of the council motion. I don't say this glibly. What we aren't as council officers are synthetic material engineers. We're not researchers. We're not scientists. So we have to rely on expert advice. And that expert advice at the moment is coming from the Football Foundation and from the FA. So they have funded a test site up in Sheffield, where they are funding alternative, infill material. So they're looking at that from an environmental impact point of view, but also from a usability point of view, from an operational point of view. And we will monitor that. Alan New, in his role, will monitor that. We work closely with the FA and with the Football Foundation. And again, we will continue to report that back to members. What we've attached in this report, the Appendix 1, is the latest update position from the Football Foundation. So that is the national up-to-date position on use of this material and use of these sites. Just to reassure members, obviously the last pitch that we've dealt with is Purdyswell, fantastic facility. We're all really, really proud of it. And just to reassure members, that is the latest technology. So yes, it uses rubber crumb. However, at Appendix 2, it sets out the mitigation measures that are in place at that site to mitigate the impact of rubber crumb. The only other thing to say, Chair, is that just in respect of that particular site, we've actually increased the amount of money that we're setting aside for replacement when it is due. That's based on the FA's advice, so that when we get to replacement, we have then sufficient amount of money to be able to replace with new technology as and when it comes. So hopefully, Chair, members will be reassured that not only does the report and its content discharge the sort of elements of the council motion, but that we are committed, whether it be St John's Sports Centre or any other site that we have, we will bring a report back to this committee before it goes to Communities Committee for a final decision. I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you, Lloyd. I think this is a useful report. I think it's nice to have this level of detail so that we can feel informed, particularly the information that gives us of when those sites are due to be replaced. I think that's really useful for members. Also, the clarification that in item 1.3 on the recommendations, I think that is a typing error where it will come to Environment Committee and in line with the motion that any environmental impact assessment will come to Environment Committee for us to comment on before it goes to Community Committee for decision. It's a bit like the conversations that we had about air quality, where licensing are the ones that are discussing it, feeding in, and then we become the decision makers. I think my understanding of the governance is this, that we would be looking at the environmental impact and giving our views as Environment Committee and forwarding those on to Communities Committee, who will then remain the decision maker. It's the complications of a committee system, but I think that's the process, and that just is a typing error that it doesn't say that. Does anybody want to make any comments or say anything about this? Councillor Rudge.
Thank you. I understand there's such a thing as a hybrid pitch, which is part artificial and part grass. Has that appeared in any of your research?
It hasn't. I'm sure there are. I don't know whether that's relating to the 4G pitches. I think the 4G pitches are completely sort of synthetic material. I think the hybrid pitches that I'm aware of are top class, world class sporting facilities. So the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff, you know, a lot of football pitches, they sort of they almost sew in synthetic grass into natural grass. I can't imagine what the price of that would be. And I think what we've got to bear in mind is that we have a limited budget, and certainly for new sites we will be looking for grant funding for those. But no, that's not come up as part of our work to date.
Councillor Holmes, did I see you wanting to comment on this? Does anybody else? Councillor Cooper.
Thank you very much, Chair. I voted in Communities Committee on the 3G pitch at Perd as well. I wasn't expecting to vote in favour of that, but I was so impressed by the officers had been flexible and put a lot of environmental detail into it. So against my better thought, I really did vote for it, and I felt really confident to do it. So I'd like to commend the work that those officers did at that time. And I'd like to thank you for thinking about the life cycle of this pitch and when it needs replacing. I think that's really important going forwards in our planning. So thank you.
I also think that this slightly additional step in the process will provide that reassurance that people are looking for, that it's a wider group of members who've all scrutinised it, and hopefully if there is that level of detail, that officers will, if they can convince you, Hannah, of the need, of the desire to vote for it, I think that we'd feel confident they would be able to convince Environment Committee, and if we are, I think it gives that robust nature to, as decisions go forward, that we have considered all the environmental impact, because I think this council is very concerned about those issues. Karen, did you want to come in now?
Remember that. Yeah, obviously I'm very pleased to see this coming here, because I feel that we need that environmental oversight. And as we discussed at group leaders yesterday, we're also looking at a governance review, and it sort of got suggested that because we want to put nature and biodiversity and the environment first, that it's going to get included in every report where it's relevant, and that's perhaps a future plan. But so we might not have to necessarily bring them to every committee, providing every committee has got that awareness and is keeping the eye on the ball of the biodiversity in the environment. So I'm very pleased to see this. I'm pleased to see that we are, I'd spoken to Alan New as well, and he'd said how keen he was to make sure we progress towards better surfaces in the future. But, you know, we are where we are. I expected the vote to go through. I was just, and I agree with the sporting elements of it all, and I always did. And they are practical pitches, but I just do sometimes think we really do need to stop and think about the you know, we are covering a big patch of grass with another artificial thing, and what happens to it? We've always got that potential pollutant that we could have avoided if we'd stuck with natural grass. And I know sports people, I'm not a sporty person, so I know sports people go, oh no, I can't use it. So there we are where we are.
So is everybody, Councillor Lewin.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that on all reports we have a section called Social, Environmental and Economic Implications already. And as part of the community's initial thing, I think I've talked about this before, we had an additional environmental report done because of the concerns from the Green Party. So, you know, I think this is excellent, and it gives me confidence, but we have to, it's things like planning. We have to consider everything when we look at things. This is why we've got equality implications as well. We know that without this pitch, there are many people in our community who don't have access to a football pitch. And actually, people have said to me, I could never book a football pitch before, and now I can. And to me, that's a win, because the health of our residents is also extremely important. And in the planning application, it had a 40% increase in biodiversity. There aren't many planning applications that do that. That is best practice. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
So do we have any other comments? If not, is everybody happy to note this report and to agree it? Just a show of hands would be useful to make sure. That'd be lovely, thank you. That's unanimous. Which brings us on to the last item, which again is another example of how we're needing to work within the committee system to make sure that we know where things are. My understanding is that I'll pass to Lloyd to talk about the splash pad. This is particularly here because the splash pad, when it was raised as an issue, nobody quite knew where it was going to fit in the committee system, so it by default got raised in the Environment Committee and therefore was picked up initially in Environment Committee, and on further reflection it made much more sense to link it to the play strategy, so it's gone to PED. But given that it was raised here, it felt sensible to bring it back to here, so I'll hand over to Lloyd to talk about it.
Thank you, Chair. And again, I won't take too much time. The other reason for bringing it is we were just conscious that you as Environment Committee members may be approached by residents as to what was going on, because it is a key facility within a park, and obviously oversight of parks sits within this council, within this committee's responsibility. So again, very briefly, Chair, the splash pad is now 14 years old, put in 2010. And the shelf life of a splash pad has been 7 and 10 years, so we've had 4 years more out of it than we really should have. Not only has downtime increased, but the cost of running it has increased as well, and we've included some figures within the report that sort of shows that. We've commissioned the original installer to come back and undertake a condition survey, and that condition survey has basically written off the below ground water filtration system. So pipes, tanks, filters and pumps that sit below ground currently. What the survey has shown is that the above ground infrastructure, so the aquatic features, are absolutely fine and in good working order. And there's also some surfacing or resurfacing work that's required as well. At the moment, we've got a wet pour surface that sits at the top of a concrete slab that could do with thickening up and improving in some parts. When we started to look then at the what the options were for moving forward, another type of splash pad appeared, which was a flow-through splash pad. So we started to think about where should we go? Should we move to a flow-through system, or should we stick with a recirculatory system? So in effect, the recirculatory system recirculates the water back through a filtration system and then pumps it back onto the splash pad. A flow-through system just gets water straight in from the mains, straight out through a snake's head or whatever it is the play feature, and then it's just simply lost back into the drainage system, and away it goes. So a flow-through system is much simpler, requires less sort of people resource, but it's a very heavy water user, so it comes with more cost as well. Given that the above ground infrastructure is in really good working order, and we are able to move all the critical infrastructure below ground, above ground, to get it out of that harsh environment, to make it more accessible and in a better environment. What we're proposing is that we stick with a recirculatory system. As I say, we move it above ground into a bigger compound area. The reason for that is that any benefits of a flow-through system are quickly outweighed by the cost of water and the loss of water. And given our environmental sustainability strategy, which we spoke about earlier, a big part of that is, as a council, for us to minimise our use of water. So the capital costs to be able to replace the key infrastructure are less than going to a flow-through system. and the revenue costs are very, very comparable. The other reason for this approach is that it gives us the best chance of being able to have it back and open in May, so for the start of the operating season next year. So the report sets out more detail against each of those points. In terms of funding, Place Economic Development Committee approved £400,000 of SIL funding 12 to 18 months ago to progress Worcester Play Plan projects. We've used around £100,000 of that to recruit some staff resource. So the remaining money we are going to put towards the cost of this work. And we're also going to use some Section 106 planning monies to make up the remainder. And thankfully, PED Committee approved that last night. That will now go on to P&R Committee for final ratification. And what we're hoping to do is that once we get through P&R Committee, we will go out to tender towards the end of November, hopefully let a contract towards the end of January, and try and get on site during February, which means that we can have a much more reliable, much more resilient splash pad site open for the start of the operating season in May next year. Happy to stop there, Chair.
So this is really an information item because it has already been approved by PED. So I don't think we aren't. I think to clarify, we're not looking to be changing the decisions. This is an information report. But if anybody has any particular questions, particularly anybody who isn't on PED and isn't up to date on the thing, that this is the opportunity to ask those questions. So do we have any questions? I'm going to take that as no. So in that case, I'm going to move on to any other items of business. I did have one notified to me at the start of the meeting. Richard, did you still want to raise that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just a question, really, whether we can have an agenda item at our future meeting about our allotments, because I'm conscious it's some time since we started the new system, which we did after our consultation with the Allotments Association, and things are moving on, but I'm not sure where we are in that process. I'm conscious also that the largest allotment in my ward, an Albury Road, at Windsor Avenue, is also growing in concern with a number of its users. And I know, Chair, you've been involved in some of the activity there, but it's certainly suffering a little bit from neglect by some of its users, and there's a lot of empty allotment hold spaces, and there's a lot of concern about security there. So I do wonder if we can have some information about the future of our allotments and what investment we've got planned to actually make sure they're more viable in the future.
Thank you, and I'm pleased to be able to tell you that actually I can answer this question without referring to officers, because it is on the forward plan for January to have an update on the allotments. And given I went to visit the Windsor Avenue allotments in July, and did note that there is some considerable work that needs to be done to bring that site up to scratch, and therefore I have asked officers to ensure there is a specific element within that report about Windsor Avenue. One of the options was to consider that ask members if they did want to, we could organise a visit to go to that site so that members have actually seen it. If you haven't had the opportunity, I think it is useful to make sure that you have visited some of your local allotment sites and also comparable ones outside of your area, so that we can have that robust discussion in January.
Very briefly, Chair, can I ask whether that paper will include options which may include self-management, which I know is an issue which some allotment holders are very keen to actually progress, basically taking the allotments out of the council system. But that's something which I know may be a long-term prospect rather than a short-term opportunity.
So the report in January is meant to be an annual report, something we want to bring to committee every single year. So what we can do is we can play back to members what our current policy position is on self-management. That will then allow members to consider that, think about it, and if there's a need or a direction for change or a thirst for change, that's something we can take back and bring back at some point.
I haven't had any other items of any other business notified to me, but I am happy to take them if anybody's got anything burning that they want to raise at the committee. If not, I'm going to close the meeting, and thank you very much for your time.